thing I really love about finance or investing is that as soon as you think you know something, you don't. And it really keeps you on your toes.
And we're live. Okay. Matt, thank you for hopping on the good of Twitter with me. I appreciate it. Big fan of your work and Grit Capital in general. It's actually kind of funny. As I've been going through this podcast journey, one of my older brothers, I have some entrepreneurial older brothers, and one of them was sending me Grit Capital things.
Yeah.
And like, dude, these people are awesome. You should follow them. Like, hey, I'm talking with one of them like in a month. So
Yeah.
I'm
Oh,
really
yeah.
excited about that.
Yeah, no, Grit, our journey, Grit acquired my newsletter a couple of months back and really going with them full time. And, our journey is to try and get as many creators as we can to kind of help people learn about investing and finance in an easy to understand kind of way. So
That's an awesome mission.
yeah, yeah. So we're getting at it. We're adding creators, and it's just been a fun journey.
Very cool. What do you how many creators do you have now, and kind of what's the goal? Do you have a number in mind?
Right now, there's about a total of I think 5 or 6 newsletters, and I'm the first full time creator, and there's a couple other part time creators, and then Genevieve, the founder, she's the CEO, but also she has 400,000 followers on Twitter, so she's right in the mix of it with us as well. So yeah.
Just so you know, one of my big passions in life, like if you were to go, I don't know if you did, but if you were to go down my list of people I've had on here since I started doing conversations versus just the solo podcast, it's pretty varied. There are stock people, politics journalists, meme accounts. It's pretty varied. But one of my passions in life, and like one of the reasons I was really excited to get you on here, is financial freedom. And just I got my CPA out of school, Master's of Accounting CPA, and just like really just wanted to learn about money. And I think that's like really where power comes from. I mean, power in the sense of over your own life. If you have the ability to take a day off work, I learned through Torah studies that's power. Now fast forward 2,000 years, 3,000, 4,000 years, obviously the typical American, we don't understand that kind of struggle. Most of us taking 2 days off of work every week, and um, the ability to kind of extend that, take the next step, is to take full control of your life, have full financial freedom, which is something I'm sure I don't have to explain to you. Saying all of that, I would love to hear like your journey. Obviously, this is something you're passionate about, something you kind of dedicate your life to. I would love to hear your journey, your story of what got you into this, and how'd you get to where you are today.
Yeah, so I started off learning about stocks in the 8th grade. I was in actually in the 8th grade. I don't think you call economics, but it was a class something similar to that, or maybe they called it economics. But my teacher had me always check his stock portfolio on Yahoo Finance, and the funny thing is today is I'm like a big Google guy, as I think we all are. Whenever your search bar automatically goes to Yahoo or like Bing or something, I can't stand that. I automatically type in google.com. But it's funny is that I still use Yahoo Finance to research stocks, just because when I was in the 8th grade, my teacher would have me go and check his stocks every day. And I don't think he knew what he was doing. He just had me do it. But I started enjoying doing it. I really didn't understand what I was doing. So I actually invested in my parents loaned me $100, and I invested in my first stock in the 8th grade. It was Sirius XM Radio. It didn't do very well. It was right before the 2008 crash, which it kind of devastated me because I was like, I didn't really understand. I just thought I was awful at it, which to be fair, I definitely was. But I just kept on learning about it. I got pretty obsessed with Warren Buffett. I played sports throughout high school, and then kind of when I got to college, I was a political science major. I love politics. Politics and finance are very married. It's like math and science. And so I just really started learning how to, invest in things, started learning about Bitcoin. I started learning about, fundamental analysis, technical analysis. And really that's just kind of started my journey. And I'll tell you, the thing I really love about finance or investing is that as soon as you think you know something, you don't. It really keeps you on your toes, that's what really gets me excited about learning about investing and learning about doing the research. And on the other hand, though, for the average person who just wants to be financially free or set themselves up for retirement, the one thing we do know in finance is you have things like index funds that if you invest in, you're going to get 10 to 12% a year, over the next 30 years. And there's things, the funny thing about finance to me is that there are things that are set in stone and there are things that just completely change every day. And the 10 to 12% return on a index fund is pretty. I mean, it's happened since 1950, so I don't see it changing anytime soon.
Yeah, it is funny that you mentioned Warren Buffett, and one of the Warren Buffett, I don't know if it's a quote, but one of his conversations, he was saying how the average person, you're better off just investing in the S&P. And he even wanted to say, we've had years where we would have just been way better off just investing in the S&P. And over the long haul, it's probably just the call. And there have been studies done showing the best investors. I'm going to mess the years up, but the best investors from 2000 2020 were dead. They were people that were actually dead that just didn't touch their stocks. So it is a funny game that way. And going back to eighth grade, you're saying, "Oh, I thought I was just bad at this." Nikola Jokic quote: "New NBA champions, like the first step is being bad at something.
Yeah,
Then you get good at something. Then you fail, and then you can really succeed."
absolutely,
And in the stock market, that just is what it is.
100%.
I learned financial literacy kind of throughout college, late high school, and I wasn't into stocks yet. Though what got me into stocks personally was the meme stock saga,
In
which
2020,
in 2020.
yeah,
Still ongoing, if you ask me.
for
But yeah,
sure.
the major blow up in 2020 with when Robinhood and all those other brokerages paused the buy button. I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like I had my 401k, but I never really like invested individually into stocks and really looked into it like that. And that just really piqued my interest. And I just really started looking into things. And I just started doing really good day trading. And then I started options trading. And it's horrible. And I
Yeah,
was like, oh my gosh. So, like you said, it'll humble you quick. It'll keep you on your toes.
I love, I do option trading more for fun, but I think the one thing you realize in 2020, if you look back, that the lesson that anyone can take outside the meme era is that when you have super low interest rates like that, is that the low interest rates were going to create this euphoric market. And if you look back in history, low interest rates have always created that, whereas higher interest rates have created kind of what we're seeing right now, which is a more of a deadbeat market. And there's a lot of when Warren Buffett values a stock, he always compares it to the interest rates because it's how is it easier if you can get because if you have high bonds are backed by the United States government. The government, they're pretty much it's risk free. If you can get 6-7% with bonds, when we said the S&P 500 gets you 10 to 12% a year, right? If you in a high interest rate environment, you can just put your money in bonds. It's risk free. As you just said, just because it's 10 to 12% guaranteed, not guaranteed, but historically speaking, for the last 20 years, a bond is guaranteed. So there's a lot less risk and so that really, like right now, we're seeing where a lot of people are moving their money into bonds and the money markets outside the market. But as soon as in 2020, for example, there was no money in bonds because the interest rates were so low that people were just putting their money into anything. And guess what? It was going up every day. It was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was
No,
awesome.
yeah. You could really trick yourself into thinking you're a genius there if you started in 2020.
Whenever like I'll watch CNBC and these old people would be like, 2020 was such a bad time for the market. I'm just like, shut the fuck up. It was awesome.
It was a great time, man.
I mean, I'm like, you could just put your money into anything. It would go straight up. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I guess what they were trying to say is they were trying to be like, oh, because it teaches you these bad habits. And I know what he was saying. It's like one of those grandpa lessons. But I'm like, shut the hell up. Like that
Everyone's
was,
making money.
yeah, I mean, it was awesome. If you weren't
No,
making 50% returns on some dumb stock, you didn't know what you're doing.
no,
Now,
absolutely. I feel like every dollar I threw turned into two.
yeah,
And I
now
thought I was
now
a genius.
now we're trying to get 5%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So you said you were a political science major. I kind of want to go back to that because I was much more always in financial freedom. I was interested in that, but I was much more interested in politics myself actually than I was in the stock market and what's happening in the stock market. Obviously, those overlap with one another. Uh, do you also? This is the good of Twitter, so this is where this question's coming from. So I don't know if you've seen what's been trending on Twitter the last week or two, but Joe Rogan had on RFK, and it blew up. It really blew up. We don't have to go down why it blew up. We'll stick to the financial markets and things like that. But he was also on the All In podcast, which is a podcast I really have enjoyed. And he talks about the trillions of debt and all these things. Do you think that, I guess we can start in different directions here, the president and the government overall really have an effect on what we're going to see going forward, what we've seen in the 2020s? Do you think it's more so the Fed? Like, how would you lay that out?
Well, I think there's a combination of both. For example, if you had someone a lot more fiscally, like we need to start cutting money in the budget, and if you had someone more fiscally conservative in there, they would have cut a lot more money recently. But a lot of this comes from when 2020 happened. We did print a lot of money. We did quantitative easing, things like that, which is really to prop up the markets. And it's this new theory that started after the 2008 Great Recession. And so I think it all kind of comes back to 2020, but also, I mean, I believe that we should be fiscally responsible. So I think there needs to be things that we need to start doing right now that allows us to cut things in the budget and start cutting that national debt. Because when you really look at, Warren Buffett says the way to look at the national debt isn't the number, but it's the debt to GDP. And right now we're at record highs, which is not good. So everyone gets obsessed with that number, right? So the number is not as, I mean, if we're pumping out a crazy ton of GDP, it's just like a company. Like, Apple doesn't have much. Well, just take Apple, the world's largest company. They're going to have a lot higher debt than me and you if we had our own company that traded in the stock market. But they're also going to have a lot more revenue, correct? So it's really about, we call it, in the finance world, we call it the debt to equity. Pretty much in the political world, it's called the debt to GDP. And right now, ours is way too high. And if we can get it back to lower pre-COVID levels, then we'll be fine. But right now, if it keeps on going up, it's not going to be good.
How would you go about getting that down?
If you just have to do it like any business would. You have to start making cuts in the budget. I mean, because I don't think that you should. If you make cuts, there's two theories: you either make cuts or you tax more. And I think when you tax more, usually whenever you tax more, it always comes down. No matter what politicians say, it usually comes down to the middle or lower class. No matter what, they always get affected somehow. For example, if you tax corporations more, all they're going to do is raise the cost of goods. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's historically what's always happened. And if you could, Bill Clinton was really good in the 90s about, he was the first one to have a budget surplus. They did a lot of, because we had a Republican House and Senate and a presidential was, he was a Democrat. So they raised some taxes where it didn't hurt the middle class as much, made a lot of budget cuts. And I think there's ways you could do kind of both, but you never get elected saying you're going to raise taxes. That's for sure. And if you're in office and you raise them, you're not going to get reelected.
Yeah, no, that is 100% true. It's really funny to see. You seem like a pretty young guy. Were you around in the 90s?
No, I was born in '94, but I'm a political nerd, so I study all. Yeah, cool. Especially when it comes to presidents, I'm a massive nerd. I read I read a lot of books about presidents.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Interesting. So I'm more of a reader of historical times. Like I got really into reading about China and the story of China. And then when Mao came around, like from the 40s to the 60s, like that time period intrigued me. I haven't read a lot about our presidents.
So I wrote a paper on Richard Nixon whenever he was the first United States president to go to China. And the crazy thing about this is that, so he was so anti-communist, right? The American, we're talking about polls today, how America never agrees on anything. Well, when Nixon was president, it was 92% of people were anti-communist. It was no and so he was considered the most anti-communist, one of the most anti-communist people in America. And so the funny thing about him is that he was the only one that the American people would accept going to China. And the crazy thing is that he had this whole secret mission. His vice president didn't know. His secretary of state didn't know. The only people who knew were him and Henry Kissinger and his chief of staff and 3 media members. And they boarded Air Force One and landed in China the next morning. And the world was shocked. And what he did was, it's called ping pong diplomacy. He played the Chinese off the Soviets. And so the Soviets were freaking out, and that's he met with Mao, and it was, it really opened up to the relationship we have with China today, good or bad.
When you say he was playing ping pong, what do you mean exactly? What was he doing there?
So the West was really concerned about the Soviets and the Chinese forming this, this massive relationship, which would, you know, a lot of people, because remember, China at the time was not China who they were today, but no one wanted the Soviets to have any more allies. So what Nixon did to counter that was that he wouldn't have met with the Chinese. So now all of a sudden he flipped that, and the Soviets started panicking, saying, "Holy crap! They just stole our future ally." And he was playing off of each one of them, saying, "Hey, if you do this or that," and then they made some trade deals, and kind of the rest is history.
Interesting. It's interesting how that time period overlaps with our own. Not only the Russia China alliance. I mean, we're very scared of that. A lot of people are very scared of that, and it makes sense to be scared of that. If I was going to like the geopolitical Game of Thrones matters of it, that would be a very scary China if they became even closer, because China's big downfall, they have a lot of debt. But the big downfall historically over the centuries has been it's just the geography. They need to import all their resources. Like I want to say it's like 85% of their population um, lives in the West, or excuse me, lives in the East, and it's very hard to navigate around that country. A good relationship with Russia, it solves a lot of your issues.
For sure.
So it's something that people are scared of, but also I think that Nixon. I didn't know Nixon did that secret mission, and I
Hmm.
I didn't know all those statistics of 92% were anti-communist and all of that. I think that's a really cool thing that we could take lessons from today. Is that something I'm not a big fan of Trump, but something I did respect about Trump, and something I like about RFK and some of these candidates versus the stereotypical politician is that in today's world we're not even going to go talk to Putin. Like it's there's no dialogue. And if you look at my Twitter account, look at my Twitter bio, I'm 100% open dialogue, 100% pro dialogue. I
Hmm.
think once you stop talking to people, that's when you see them as monsters, and that's when things can escalate. And that's not just I know we're talking geopolitically here, but even at a smaller level, a familial or friend level, a business level, like open communication, open dialogue is such an important thing. One of the reasons I love the podcast platforms that you can have these discussions. But anyway, it's a really cool parallel between Nixon in those times and these times now. It was Mao then, it could be Putin now, but
For sure.
just the willingness to go talk to Mao, and I'm sure that was a huge political risk.
Oh, it was that because
It
because
was a hell of a roll to die.
because yeah, I remember how much people were so anti-communist, and
Yeah,
it's kind of similar today if you went and talked to Putin, even because it's hard to I don't because to your listeners they have to remember that China was nothing. China was almost the equivalent of North Korea back then. I mean, they're in the terms of economic, but the Soviets were so strong. The Soviets were legit a political rival. Kind of if you reversed how the Soviets were almost what China is today back
yeah,
then. Um, And so the Soviets were always a massive threat until their empire crumbled. I think one thing that people don't, what you just said about China, about their geography, is that that's why Taiwan is such an important issue for us geopolitically. Not only the semiconductors, because that's a huge issue in itself, but if we kind of we use Taiwan as a fake, uh, almost military base because we have China surrounded. So it really messes up their logistics because we have the Philippines right there, we have Japan right there, and then Taiwan. So they can't if it was more open to it, that would help out their trade a lot. And a lot of people don't realize that's a massive. We have them kind of blocked in with Taiwan right there, and that's one of the reasons why we have them there and
interesting.
support them so much.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That makes a lot of sense. That makes a ton of sense. I like to think about the geopolitical matters as like Game of Thrones. Like put yourself in that mindset, not in a what's right, wrong mindset. Okay, you're playing a game, you're trying to win. I hadn't thought about it as a blockade
Yeah,
type
it's an
of
unofficial
situation.
blockade.
Yeah, which is similar to not to defend Putin by any means, but it's similar to what's happening up north, up in
Mm-hmm.
Europe, which is the NATO. NATO, we weren't supposed to go 1 inch to the east, and all of a sudden we're kind of in Finland, and we're kind of in Ukraine, and we're super, super close to Russia's two biggest cities, St.
And
Petersburg up north, and
we're in Poland for sure.
yeah, and and the way I can't remember exactly who I've listened to that has said this. I mean, I'm sure it's been a ton of people, but um, just you look at Russia's history as the Soviet Union, and before that, they were always invaded. Historically, they've always been invaded, and they've won every war. But the way they've won it is they give up a ton of land, and eventually, you just can't survive the winter the way they can. You just don't understand it, and all of those things.
Mhm.
Uh, with Finland being right next to St. Petersburg, I think it's like 40 miles away, something like that. Ukraine is right next to Moscow. Like it, it starts to make sense. You start to see maybe not the political figures themselves as as rational characters, but the country,
Yeah, for sure.
the move of the players as far as that. Like, oh, they're just rational chess players. That's all that's
Mhm.
happening here. And it can make you scared for what's to come with Taiwan because if you were to get into that war, which I know Ray Dalio and many smart people think that it's probably going to happen, all of a sudden, I mean that's a whole new world for us, something that we've never seen. I was born in '96, so same age as you basically, and we've been in these forever wars, but not something like
Not,
that.
yeah, it's hard to. I want to say not serious because we lost a lot of lives in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I don't want to say not serious, but like when we're talking about a country invading, Taiwan's not an ally of us, but they're massive in the semiconductor industry. And if your viewers don't understand, is that semiconductors, any piece of technology that you have from your car to anything, semiconductors are the most important part. And we're seeing that right now with how stocks like Nvidia are surging off AI and things like that. Because Nvidia is one of the leading semiconductor producers, and Taiwan is the number one country for semiconductors. And so if China invades them, we have not only a massive geopolitical issue, we have a massive technology issue. I mean, our people say the cost of cars could double. It's just that's all hypotheticals. We don't know what's going to happen to it, but I mean it's a really scary issue, and it goes to the point of you know Chamath from All In podcast tweeted the other day about how he doesn't think China isn't going to be a factor in 10 years because their population is so old. So let's just say hypothetically he's right. Well, for President Xi Jinping to stay in power, when you're a dictator, even though he's a president, but he's a dictator,
Yeah,
um, you only if your economy is crashing, you either stay in power by two ways: you make a massive trade deal with someone like America and become allies with them, or war. I mean, that's happened throughout history, and so that's a scary conclusion that hey, if say Shamath is right about China's economy in the next 10 years, I mean, either President Xi has to come to America and they make some wild trade deal, or he probably will invade Taiwan.
yeah. I am an optimist. So before I say what I think, if I had to put my money down on something, my chips down on something, know that is my bias. But I also do think that I think when it comes down to it, it's going to be some sort of trade deal.
I do too.
You never really know with Taiwan. 2050, maybe things change. 2040, but from what I studied, and I haven't done much studying into Japan's history, but from what I've read and from what I've seen, Japan's economic boom in kind of the 80s, 90s. I mean, everyone was studying them. Every MBA program was teaching about them. Like we should do Japanese business practices, and it was very unsustainable. And it was really one of the big things that they were an importer of resources. And I look at all the statistics and see the exact same similarities with China. And it almost, honestly, China seems like Japan on steroids.
Yeah,
And I think that they're just going to be absolutely doomed unless they make a huge trade deal. And luckily for us as Americans, like America's that team that you need to make that trade deal with. And if you want to stay in power and if you want just famine not to hit as hard. That was what took down Mao's China, which
for
it's
sure.
one of my favorite stats I've read from all the books. Not even stats, just like little pieces of information I've read from all the books about China that I've consumed. Is Mao and the communists win the war in '49. By '52, they owned over half the farmland. The government owned over half the farmland. What took down Mao's communist China was famine. When President Deng came in, the first thing they did was restore all the farmland to privatize the land. They installed a type of capitalism, which whatever is happening in China today, it's a type of capitalism. And
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden you see the greatest increase of food supply in history, in a nation's history. And that that would be a big threat for them if they did choose war. Is again, you're just an importer of so much. You don't have a lot of sustainable farming, especially in the West. You don't have energy resources, and like it seems like a way to. I am an optimist, and what do I know? But it does seem like a faster route to lose power is to go to war. It's a way bigger risk, roll the dice, than to make a trade deal and keep your people fed and at least somewhat happy, right? So,
For
yeah,
sure.
that's what I see. But again, what do I know?
And one thing about President Xi Jinping is that I think he's incredible at playing chess. I really do. But he's he's such a. I mean his. I mean he still reads Karl Marx. He's a very big communist at heart, and that's who he got
Yeah,
educated on. I think if he ever lose power and they get someone who is more open market that could really change the future of China. I don't know if that's ever going to happen. Maybe I think it will probably happen in our lifetime because they send a lot of their people to get educated in the West in either Europe or America. I heard a lot of the young people have come back and said, "Hey, we want more open markets," but you can't
mhm.
say that out loud, because
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And one thing on your Japan, there's a good book I think you would like is I just actually read it, Stress Test by Timothy Geithner, and he was a Treasury Secretary in for 2008 for Obama. He was also the New York Fed chair for President George W. Bush, and he was actually in part of the recovery efforts helping Japan helped save Japan in the 90s after when their economy collapsed. And he was kind of considered like a leading expert on Japan. And one thing that he said, it was in his book, he went in a lot more details than this. But he said the real estate market, everyone wanted the real estate market to be like Japan. But at the end of the day, it came down to a supply and demand bubble because, they're not a small island, but at the end of the day, they're just this island. And they were getting all this money so that they just drove up all these real estate prices and it just never was sustainable. So it's very interesting that you compared China today as Japan in the 90s.
Yeah, I haven't read a ton about it. That's just without the book's name, so I'm gonna have to read that one for sure. But just from what I've seen, 'cause I have read a good amount about China, that seems to be the comparison that experts go to.
Mhm.
Is reminds me the most of this, and yeah, I don't know what's going to happen, and the more you read, the more you understand about history. Which is one of the things I like about Ray Dalio a lot is that he's just a student of history, and that's how he does these macroeconomic predictions and these cycle predictions. I got very into reading cycles, different types. The fourth cycle I thought was super interesting. I listened to it and I'm gonna listen to it again and again to really understand it. But
Mhm.
even for like geopolitical figures, like geopolitical authors like George Friedman, Peter Zahn, like they all talk about cycles, whether it's socioeconomic, political, whatever it may be, and it is an interesting thing, and it does seem like China's on a similar cycle as Japan. Who knows? But I do want to backtrack a second. You mentioned that Karl Marx is one of the President Z, whatever his name is,
Xi Jinping.
Xi Jinping. He reads Karl Marx. I assume you've read a decent amount of economists or about Adam Smith's Invisible Hand or any of the more recent players like Maynard Keynes, Milton Friedman. Are there certain economists that really speak to you?
Probably Milton Friedman, but I try and look at, you know, I've read a lot of economists, and I think if you go back and look at, actually, I'd say you're gonna laugh, but my he's not an economist, but I read Warren Buffett. I mean, all the time, and
Yeah,
his
yeah,
shareholder letters. I mean, just as good as any economist, I think, because it really talks about how, and a lot of people realize is Warren Buffett's also a Democrat. So it's not like he's just this raging capitalist. His dad was a House Republican congressman, and then when he got married to Susie Buffett, his wife was a pretty hardcore Democrat and kind of really changed a lot of the issues on social issues. And but I think when it comes to a lot of his principles really work in today's time is that one, he always going to bet on America. Two is that if you he's not necessarily, I think whenever he's not a big believer in, say, like some say conservatives want like a 10% tax on corporations, and then Democrats want a 30%. He's right in the middle of, hey, 20-25%, because it comes down to, hey, you know it's almost in a kind of what we were talking about earlier, is that in theory A 30% tax corporation is going to get you the taxpayers a lot. Is going to get the government a lot more money. So that could technically fix the national debt. Well, one, Congress always doesn't have an income problem; they have a spending problem. That's both parties. I mean, they both do it. But two is that even whenever you raise taxes so high, is that it's really going to hurt people like me and you. I mean, we're seeing it right now. When the cost of goods went up, they took it out on us. They didn't take any less profits. But also, a lot of people don't realize is that hey, whenever the cost of goods go up, it's because also probably the rent goes up, so the business has to pay more money in rent.
Yeah.
The insurance goes up. They have all these hidden costs that a lot of people who don't understand business don't realize is that hey, there's also a reason why that the hamburger went from $1 to $2 more. And so I think we have to find always the right answer is a balance. You don't want large corporations to have highway robbery. Like I don't think it's cool. I'm a massive Apple fan. I don't think it's cool though they have 45 different. That's just a random number. But have all these different shell companies around the world that evade taxes. I don't think that's cool. I understand why they do it. They're not breaking any laws. They're just playing by the laws. But I don't think that kind of stuff's cool.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a hard thing to balance when I started studying taxes in my master's course and really learning about it, and just it was definitely a paradigm shifting time for me of like, oh dang, this is a much more complicated game, especially when you go globally. Like when you go globally,
Yeah.
it changes everything. And there's people that want to do a global wide tax. I don't like that because then you're just really screwing the third world countries. And part of the reason I love Bitcoin isn't for me per se, but I love that I think what it's going to do for third world countries and developing nations to not be as strongman as they. I mean, it means still you're still going to be a little bit strongman by America and other big countries, but not as much so with Bitcoin, especially as a citizen. Crazy stories happen where there was someone who escaped Ukraine, and the guy had $5,000 worth of Bitcoin. And back in the day, I'm Jewish. Like I've studied a lot of Jewish history, and back in the 1910s up to the 1940s, a lot of Jews were kind of getting that feeling of that inherited paranoia feeling of, hey, this doesn't feel right. We might need to get out of here. The stories that I read of even friends of my grandparents were hey, we need to get this gold into this country, and then it would take months and months and months of planning just so you could escape a situation, and not just Jews, but whoever it may be around the world, just so you can escape a situation with a little bit of money. I think Bitcoin's a great revolutionary thing for that. But I'm going down a different rabbit hole. It's cool that Warren Buffett. I want to stick on that for a second. It's very cool that Warren Buffett is kind of your guy. My brother lives in Omaha. He's a commercial developer out there, brokerage and development out there, and he has hammered some Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger into my brain. And I think Warren Buffett's such a cool guy. Those two in particular are such cool guys because they've accomplished something that almost no one ever has accomplished. Not only are they super successful and rich in the business success in that sense, they're very well respected, and they're stock people who are very well respected by virtually everybody, and they seem to have lived this life and been able to say their thoughts. I don't think they're saying anything for the TVs. I think they're really just saying their thoughts on what they think is good and bad. I have found them to be such interesting characters because of that. Something that there's a podcast called Founders. Have you heard of Founders?
I've heard of it. I've never listened. I've heard about it. I just never listened to it.
He loves
who's the host of that?
David Senra. Okay. He's the host of that one. And in my opinion, I think he might be the best podcaster for what he does in the world. As far there's the Joe Rogans who do what I like to do, which I just love to get to know people. I love the conversations. I love learning. This guy doing solo podcasts, it's such a difficult thing to do, and he's just so passionate. You hear it in his voice. He's so knowledgeable. He loves what he does. He reads a ton of books, and he'll teach you about what he's read. He'll tell you about it, and. It's an extremely difficult thing to do a podcast in that style. and
Mhm.
he just crushes it. And there's so much good information. But his guy is Charlie Munger. He just loves Charlie Munger. You want to sit down, get lunch with him. And I've always found those guys very fascinating because it's such a difficult thing to, not that you need the love of people, the esteem of strangers, but if you're able to accomplish that while doing what they did, it's one of the most unique things I've ever seen in my life. And
For
it's something
sure.
that I've kind of been going down a bit of a rabbit hole, not quite as much as I would want to yet, but when I was in Omaha, I tend to go down that rabbit hole. I'm just in that area and think, okay.
If you get the essays of Warren Buffett's a great book to go down that rabbit hole with, and then any of his annual shareholder letters, great, easy. It's the easiest way to go, and I still reference them all the time. So it's a good rabbit hole to go down. And one thing I think they do is that. So, are you familiar with Bill Ackman?
I know the name.
So he just got into the whole Joe Rogan RFK
Oh, he jumped
vaccine
in?
debate. Yeah, and but see, he's one of the. I have a lot of respect for him, but I don't really like him as a person at all. He's one of the, he's the founder of a hedge fund called Pearson Square. He's really good at what he does, 100%. The difference between him and Warren Buffett is that during COVID, when everyone was really scared in 2020, it was like March 13th, 14th, right around the middle of March. He went on CNBC and cried and said, "The world's coming to an end. All hell is here. It's over. All stocks going to zero." I mean, I'm just paraphrasing.
Yeah.
And he was short, and he made $2.5 billion. Warren Buffett would never, ever, ever, ever do that because he thinks he has a moral responsibility not to do that. And I would say Bill Ackman, he does too. He's that well respected. He's earned that respect. So maybe he thinks he can do that. But it's just crazy to me. That's the difference between a Warren Buffett and a Charlie Munger than a Bill Ackman. And so there's
No,
not very many Warren Buffetts left.
yeah, no, he doesn't. One of the things that I'm into, and one of the communities I hope to keep talking to is AMC. That going back to that meme stock
Oh
saga,
yeah,
I'm in that
those
play.
those those people are wild, man.
Oh my gosh, I talk about rabbit holes, man. I went down that. I found the bottom of it. I found the bottom of that rabbit hole. Like I was all the way in. I learned a ton about technical analysis and how just how all the statistics, short interest and um, percentage on loan and how does this affect it and all these things. It was really my learning, is my playground. It was my learning experience. And the fight that those people are in, I'm a part of. I'm in it, and I don't want to leave. I mean, until this thing's over, I'm really excited to see if we can win and if that community can win. But one of the things they are fighting is exactly what we were talking about. So I didn't know this guy went on TV and basically pumped his position. But happens all the time. Is that you see all these FUD articles, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. If anyone doesn't know that, you see all these FUD articles come out about certain stocks, and oh, lo and behold, you go and find out that this company is short or this bank is short that company, and it's a very despicable game. Jim Cramer, who meme stock people love to make fun of. There's a video of him from the early 2000s, maybe the late 90s, talking about exactly how you go about doing that, how you put out negative articles, and you go on news and you talk about how bad things are going to get, and it's just a guaranteed way to make money. And it's one of the things that the meme stock community people are fighting for. And I wouldn't just say meme stock. I mean, it's everywhere. There's the Doge community. It's kind of one of the things that formed them, and a lot of people in crypto communities, NFT communities, just the financial, I'd say financial retail community in general at large. It that does seem to be something that connects everybody. Is the fact that, hey, we want to fight for fair, transparent markets. Have you heard of We the Investors?
Have not.
Market reform advocacy led by you for you. We want transparency, simplicity, and fairness, choice and control, best execution, and better settlement and clearing. And Dave Lauer, I know, is very involved in that. I don't know if he is like the chairman per se, but him, Jay Brown, who is a retail advocate. I've had him on the podcast. Very cool guy. He Jay Brown went on Jon Stewart's show. I think Dave Lauer did as well. They interviewed Gary Gensler actually, and that's really what they are pushing for. I think those two are good representations of the retail advocate movement and something that does seem to connect. Whether it's people like me who I don't get me wrong, I'm very interested in more fair markets and a more equitable world and all of those things. At the same time, like I'm a CPA and I was like, okay, it's a good chance to make money.
Yeah.
It connects people like me to just advocates and people that are fighting for a better world. It and the chance to make money. The meme stocks did that. The crypto did that. It's a really cool movement we've seen here. I'd say in the past less than a decade of how retail has grown, and even what's his name, Michael Burry. Even he had commented on Twitter about how this is the best buy and hold generation of all time. That everyone was supposed to leave. Historically, everyone leaves when
Yeah, when it gets
XYZ
bad.
happens. And I don't want to say our generation because it spans generations, but our generation, we've been able to educate ourselves and through people like you and many others. And again, it's why I love the good of Twitter and like Matt Allen and Grit Capital and everyone is educating people. It's crazy how these little pieces of education just spread over social media, over memes, over TikTok. So like all of those things, it's very cool to see. I don't remember how I got down this rabbit hole. I thought we were talking about Warren Buffett a second ago, but it's really cool, man. It's so again, it's why I ended up going with the good of Twitter is that there's so many good people on here that are spreading perspectives and
Mhm.
education and financial freedom. Again, it's just one of those things where it, in my mind, it's the most important thing in your individual life. It
Mhm.
helps you whatever you want to do in life. Take care of your family, have more time with your family, travel the world, just give you stability. And the people like you and that do it the right way, like Warren Buffett, and just thousands of people now that have Substacks and all of those things. It's very cool to see. I really love seeing it. So, I guess it's a long rant saying thank you, man. Keep doing what you do.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. I mean, I just, what I try and do on Twitter each day is just trying to educate people to the best that I can and try and take complex issues and break it down simple. Sometimes it gets good reactions. Sometimes it doesn't. And it's just part of what we do. So,
Part of the game.
yeah.
So actually, we talked a lot about a lot of other people, historical figures. I want to hear more about you. What was your professional journey? How did you get to making Substack? So you started out political science. Did you finish political science? Like, what was
I,
your first job at
yeah, I was
school?
political science, and then I spent some time in D.C. Worked underneath Senator David Perdue, and then I came back home, and my family's in the funeral business, so I actually helped out my dad for a little bit and decided I want to do finance. So I launched an app, Bean Invest, and the app eventually didn't work, but it kind of ran off my newsletter. So I created it was called the Matt Allen newsletter or the Matt Allen letter. And it was a Substack where, like I said, just took simple ideas and broke them down for the everyday person about finance. Then we also the premium version gives out stock information about certain stocks, and then kind of thing came where Gene and I, the founder of Grit, started having conversations, and they acquired my newsletter, and so here we are. And also, I rebranded my newsletter into the Common Capitalist. Does the same exact thing. I just changed the name, and then I took on a second newsletter, which is called Follow the Money, and that tracks congressional stock trades. And so I think there was a whole disconnect between the inside information that Congress is getting versus the stock trades they're making, and I tried to make it the whole point of that newsletter is to try and make things more accessible for the average person.
Very cool. Very cool. Have you heard of Unusual Whales?
I have, yeah, it kind of plays off
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, so I think that's part of what made him blow up was the congressional stock trade charts that he'd
Mm-hmm.
make. Again, one of those things that our generation, and I hate saying our generation, but because I have talked to so many people who are much older than us and hell, even younger than us that are privy to this as well. But it's one of those things that we really woke up to that even people that aren't into finance and aren't into the political world the memes, honestly, memes are an incredible thing. The memes have reached them in a sense where, oh yeah, Pelosi, oh yeah, she does insider trading. Like everyone just knows it, and
Yeah,
everyone understands congressional trading's happening, which I don't think you could really say, at least not individual characters. You could people didn't know that before. And again, there's been a revolution and a continuous revolution of education, and again, it's really due to the technology, but the people like you, I'd like to say people like me, although people doing much bigger things than me,
that's not true.
spreading spreading the education and just having the conversations. In a lot of my conversations, especially with people that run meme accounts, which I think is just such a cool thing. But I call it spreading units of culture. That's what I would call a meme, and more so in just like what we think of as a meme, a picture. But the study of mnemonics is anything that moves culture, anything that can help move culture. We're really just kind of what, in my mind, what I've seen. This isn't anyone I've read, just what I've seen. Social media and the internet is really still pretty young. It's
Hmm.
almost like an adolescent, maybe just hitting its teenage years. So many individuals now have the ability to reach each other, and we're really just now taking advantage of it and learning how to monetize it so it's sustainable. It's very cool to see. It's very cool to see people like you and just what's happening. I really do think it's leading to a peaceful revolution, and which is like the best revolution. I don't want to tear down the system. The system's pretty great.
Hmm.
In my opinion, America's pretty damn great
For sure.
I don't think I have to convince you of that.
No.
Not one of those conversations. Not one of those. Hey, do you know who Karl Marx really was?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's.
uh,
I think a lot of. I do think people don't realize how great America is and how people risk their lives every day to try and get here. So we have our
yeah,
problems, and people highlight those problems. But at the end of the day, it's a lot better alternative than most countries, and if not every country.
absolutely. I just had the conversation actually. I moved to Chicago recently. I'm a bit of a nomad. I'm currently sitting in Colorado as we speak,
Oh,
but
nice.
moved to Chicago recently, and I have friends there who are so anti-America. And at one point, it's like, okay, you got to tell me what's better. Give me another country, and I'll tell you what's wrong with that country. Like I'll tell you what's happening. And when you say America's horrible, y'all getting compared to what? Which is a Ben Shapiro thing. Which I'm not the biggest Ben Shapiro guy, but you know what? He's right there. Is that if you're gonna say America's horrible, tell me compared to what? Compared to what do you want? And utopia is a dangerous idea. That's Karl Marx's and socialist and communist ideas, and we see where those lead. And what scares me, honestly, more than anything, is narcissism, is the elitism. It That's what scares me. Is thinking you we know best, and the masses just need to do what we say, and that's what seems to drive every country, especially when you start out in a democracy and you delve into totalitarianism. That
Hmm.
seems to be the way it goes. There seems to be an essence of narcissism, which is like elitism, and protectionism. That's always in the that's always what's happening is, hey, we want to protect this class of people. We want to protect our country, and you can see a little bit of a slide towards that. I don't think it's going to continue down that road. Part of the reason that whether I agree with RFK's takes on vaccines or the economy or nuclear energy, which I tend to disagree with most of this, he does seem to understand that. He does seem to understand, hey, let's stop creating boogeymen. Let's open dialogue. And whether it's, I don't know who it's going to be or what voices and characters are going to come out of this on the other end, but I do think in 2030, and you already see it now, we're starting to head out of that direction because we've kind of been on a slippery slope in it, and people are waking up to it. And again, it's due to education. Obviously, you and I are talking mostly financial education and politics, but in so many different realms, it's due to all of us little people being able to spread culture and education and just conversation more than
For
anything.
sure.
Honestly, conversation around the world.
And the movement of people like you and independent creators has really allowed people like an RFK to even get a platform. Because if this was 2008, he wouldn't be getting any interviews on mainstream media.
No,
And,
absolutely.
and so that's kind of, and I think eventually you should keep on going down that path where it's probably going to end up being the best thing ever for America, which is kind of odd to say, but it really is because I think it's going to give, kind of like you said, it's, the elitists and stuff won't have as much protection as they would in 2030 when these platforms. I mean, if you go on like the Rogan effect, if you go like Joe Rogan, like Andrew Yang was a nobody until he went on Joe Rogan, and it just blew him up, which is
Mhm.
crazy. I mean,
Yeah.
and not only that, but I think there's going to be multiple Joe Rogans in the future. I'm not taking anything away from Joe Rogan. I just think that's the way media is headed.
Yes, I agree. I agree completely. That's like, I mean, Joe Rogan is one of the people, if not the person that sent me down this route. Like, I'd say one of the people. But when I saw him, and I feel very lucky to have, like, my friends or my brothers or whoever, the internet may see me as like, oh, it's a Rogan bro. It's a 20 something Rogan bro. Yeah, of course this guy likes it. And but I started watching him when, like, he'd have professors on.
Me too.
He had Brett Weinstein on. I think it was the first time I've ever, like, heard. My buddy told me, "Hey, go watch this Brett Weinstein guy talk to this." This I'd never heard of Joe Rogan. I know he's kind of famous before, but I'd never heard of him before the podcast. And so I'd watch him talk to professors and talk to experts and doctors, and then I for the first time in my life, I got to, like, consciously firsthand see overall mainstream media and just what I would have considered a conspiracy theory, honestly, of
Yeah.
all these big corporations working together and government working together to kind of try and take out this guy because he had such a big platform and he started saying things that, whether you agree with or not, it went against the narrative they wanted to push. And all of a
Mhm.
sudden, it's just, oh, this guy is bad and racist and whatever. And anyone that's actually listened to him talk, the reason he has his platform is because he is so open. He's so curious. He's not judgmental. He's curious. Dude. And he
Mhm.
lets everyone come on and talk. I respect that. Millions of people respect that. And that's why he got the platform he got. And I agree with you. I think there's going to be a ton of Joe Rogans in the future. And podcasting is something I really like about RFK's platform, is that he's taking the Trump route of Trump used Twitter in a new way. No one connected with people as a candidate the way Trump did. And RFK is doing these 2 3 hour conversations to connect with people in a new way. And I think it's very creative. I like the platform a lot. I like what he's doing, how he's going about it. And it's very interesting to see the evolution of freedom in a sense. Yeah, I guess it really would be freedom in a sense. Like, it's very interesting to see that how slowly over time, it's like a stock chart where it goes up and down,
Mhm.
but slowly over time, power has been spread to the masses through innovation and technology, and then people coming along and using that. I mean, the Gutenberg print and press is one of the things that pops in my head.
And that is the great thing about America is that the technology innovation it allows us to do that, and then two, just the freedom to be able to have those conversations. Because if you did that in China, you'd be executed.
Oh yeah, and even in Western countries, I mean, the more I learn about these countries, it's it's kind of scary. It's wild how much more I love America learning about other countries, because even in Canada, which so many people, when I travel abroad, so many people, including Canadians, like, oh, Canada and America, it's the same. America, people say it's where you go for freedom, but Canada's the same thing. I'm like, oh man, I saw people that had the wrong political opinion get their bank accounts frozen. That doesn't feel like the same thing to me. And in Britain, you don't have freedom of speech. In Germany, you don't have freedom of speech. So actually, that's one of the opinions that gets me in trouble with. I'd say my liberal or progressive Jewish friends is that, like, I'm very anti the laws in Germany. I'm very anti. You should be able to draw a swastika and not go to jail. Do I think that's a good? No. Like, obviously, I hate that, and it makes me uncomfortable, and I'm offended by it. All those things, but it it feels, just through my studies, it feels like, okay, maybe in Germany it won't be Jews again, but it feels like a good way to make a new boogeyman and
Yeah, that's
create
true.
something that it's a very slippery slope. And I know slippery slopes are fallacies, but you know, the way it has happened is that you can't say these words because for the greater good, we need to suppress your speech for the greater good. It's a protectionism thing. Um, and it's very scary to see that in other places. And I don't think it will ever really come to America. Although I think the left has fallen into it. I mean, the right has its own cancel culture and all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
I think the left has very much fallen into the elitism. We need to not let these words be said. Not have these debates for the overall greater good. And that's why I think you're going to see, whether it's RFK or someone else in the future. I used to think it was going to be Andrew Yang for a second. And I love the Forward Party. I love what they're doing a lot, actually. I think the grassroots kind of movement, they're starting from the bottom in individual counties, and they're doing ranked choice voting and all these things I really like. But whether it's Andrew Yang or RFK or some unknown player in the future, I think the party will change on the left, and new parties will emerge. And I think we're going to come out of this kind of hectic time better than ever.
For
And
sure.
like Warren Buffett says, don't bet against America. That's one of the things
Yeah.
that I go to.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what he preaches and that's what he believes. I was talking about Hitler and I was actually reading the appeasement theory last night, the foreign policy theory that where Neville Chamberlain, he was the prime minister of the UK. They them in the West had this whole appeasement theory to Hitler towards like it's kind of what some people believe that we should do to him. Actually, the far right believes we should do to Putin right now. Is it's kind of just kind of give the opposite of like this is why helping Ukraine is that. So we did the appeasement theory and just kind of let Hitler go about taking land in their late 30s until it eventually became too late. And it's called the appeasement theory of like, hey, just appease them because everyone was so scared to do another world war because we just came off World War One, and so it was like it was kind of interesting. The whole article was about just kind of the parallels between what Hitler did versus what Putin is trying to do with Crimea, and also you could easily say they don't; those two aren't anything alike. But just kind of like I think whenever, like you said, when you look at geopolitics, it's a game of chess. And so if you mess up that game, you could be like what Neville Chamberlain did was he messed it up. He was wrong. he shouldn't have done appeasement. But and it can be the complete opposite now, which is why I always find geopolitics very interesting.
Yeah, no, me too. I'm with you. And I found this conversation very interesting, but we are at the hour point. So I'll ask you a few more questions and I'll let you go, get back to your day. And these are questions I ask everyone at the end. We've already talked about a few books, but I do always ask, what are some of your favorite books, some paradigm shifters? I've written a couple down already, but anything else in your head?
One of my favorite books is Talking with Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. It's he's real famous for The Outliers and his other books, but that's one that kind of really, I mean, I love it. It had a great impact on my life, and it had more impact than any of his other books, which just says a lot because, like I said, all his
Yeah.
others are the best. So that'd probably be my number one I'd recommend to people is Talking with Strangers if you have never read it. It's not really finance related, it's just life related.
Yeah, no, I've read that one. So Malcolm Gladwell is actually like almost my first love of an author. My dad is one of his big things is be a lifelong learner. Never stop
Mm-hmm.
learning. It's his dad was his hero, and one of the things he really loved about him is that he never stopped learning. He died around the time the iPad came out, but he was learning the iPad. He was on it. He was learning how to use it. And he was like always wanting to learn and read and all of those things. And my dad introduced me to Malcolm Gladwell when I was very young. It was one of his favorite authors when I was around 10 years old or so. And that was one of my first loves. So yeah, when Talking to Strangers came out, I read it right away.
Yeah,
I love that book.
it's a great book. Yeah, I love it
Yeah,
about the CIA agent who during the '90s who was known as the leader for Cuba relations, and that she was possibly going to be the next CIA chief. And she was loved throughout the agency. She was brought into President Clinton to brief him on things going on in Cuba, and the whole time she was sleeping with Fidel Castro. Yeah, that's it was basically saying you can't judge a book by its cover.
Yeah. No, it's incredible. And then my last question, and I'll let you go. In your opinion, what is the meaning of life?
To to achieve and do the things that you want to do, and don't let anyone decide what you want to do except yourself. So
I love it. To achieve and do things that you want to do.
yeah.
Amazing. I'm gonna write all these answers down at some point and
Okay.
go over them. But that I like that answer a lot. Matt, I appreciate your time. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank
I
you,
got to
Troy. Thank
do
you
it.
so much for having me on, man.
Of course. Thank you for coming on. I'm really excited to see your growth and you doing what you want to do and achieve all your goals and Grit Capital's goals. And
For
I would love
sure.
to do this again, a few months, a year down the road and
Absolutely.
catch
I'd
up.
love to, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you again, sir. I appreciate your time. Have a great rest of your day.
You too, man. Thank you.